Where are you coming from tonight? Where are you headed?
Heading home.
You been drinking at all? Anything illegal in the car I need to know about?
No, sir.
All right, then we'll keep it simple. Let me take a quick look in the car and you'll be on your way.
No, I don't consent to a search.
So you're telling me you have a problem with me checking?
I'm telling you no.
People who got nothing to hide don't.
The deputy believed he was running the same late-night script he'd run 100 times. A small equipment stop, a few extra questions, a consent search if the driver looked nervous, a little pressure if the driver didn't. He picked the wrong man because the driver didn't panic, didn't argue, and didn't try to talk his way out of anything. He did something that throws off officers who rely on intimidation instead of procedure. He stayed calm, answered what was required, and kept his boundaries clear when the deputy tried to turn a tag light stop into a fishing trip. That deputy didn't realize he was doing all of it on camera, with dispatch audio running, and with a driver who understood exactly how misconduct gets proven, through timestamps, policy limits, and the officer's own written words. And when the driver finally identified himself as a federal judge, he didn't use it like a threat. He didn't throw status around. He didn't demand special treatment. He stated a fact after the stop had already been stretched past its purpose. The deputy still kept pushing. Right after this hook, tell me where you're watching from. City and state. And if you watch these stories because you're tired of power trips getting excused, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the ones where the record does the talking. Now let's go back to how it actually started, because the most believable part of stories like this is that the first 2 minutes looked normal. It was after midnight on a county highway with long, dark stretches and occasional side roads. Deputy Cole Harkins was patrolling alone. The traffic was light, the night was slow, and his attention was on small violations that could justify a stop. He spotted a sedan ahead with a dim taglight. That was enough. He pulled in behind it and activated his lights. The driver, Malcolm Reed, responded the way officers claim they want drivers to respond. He signaled, slowed, and pulled over smoothly. He chose a safe shoulder. He stopped with plenty of space. He kept his hands visible. Harkins walked up to the driver's side window and started the stop as an equipment violation. Reed gave his license, registration, and insurance quickly. No stalling, no sudden movements, no sarcasm. He acted like a person who just wanted to fix the issue and go home. That's where the stop should have stayed simple. Instead, Harkins shifted away from the taglight and into control. He asked where Reed was coming from, where he was headed, why he was out so late, whether he had been drinking, whether there was anything illegal in the car. The questions didn't match the reason for the stop, and they weren't about writing a citation for an equipment issue. They were about testing the driver. Reed answered the basic questions that actually mattered for the traffic stop and kept the rest limited. He didn't refuse to speak altogether. He didn't challenge the deputy. He kept it polite and short, the way a careful adult does when they don't want their own words turned into inconsistencies. Harkins tried a different angle. He pushed for consent to search. He did it the way officers often do, with soft language that pretends consent is a routine formality. Reed refused, calmly, clearly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult the deputy. He didn't make a speech about rights. That was the moment the deputy took it personally. Harkins didn't accept the answer and move on. He asked again, then again, reworded. He treated the refusal like a problem that needed to be corrected, not a legal decision a driver is allowed to make. Reed didn't change his tone. He stayed cooperative about what the stop actually was. He stayed calm about what he didn't have to do. Harkins's demeanor tightened. His voice got sharper. His body language shifted closer and more rigid. He started framing Reed's calm refusal as if it were disrespect, even though Reed wasn't being disrespectful. Then Reed asked a question that forces an officer to either stay lawful or admit he's drifting. Reed politely asked whether he was being detained for anything beyond the taglight issue. That question didn't come with attitude. It came with clarity. It was the kind of question that makes a stop either end or escalate, depending on the officer's temperament. Harkins escalated. He didn't give a clean answer that matched the facts. He started acting like the question itself was a provocation, He began treating Reed as difficult because Reed was not submitting to an unnecessary search. And then Harkins called for backup. Over the radio, he described Reed in a way that didn't match what was happening. He used the kind of vague language that's meant to justify escalation later. Difficult, suspicious, not cooperating, concerned for safety. It was narrative building. He was setting the table so the next officers arriving would step into his version of events. Here's what Harkins didn't seem to understand in that moment. Dispatch audio locks you into a timeline. If you say a driver is suspicious at minute 3, but the video shows you had no specific reason at minute 3, that mismatch becomes a problem. If you claim escalating concern, but the driver's behavior stays calm and consistent, that becomes a bigger problem. Backup arrived and parked behind Reed. Now there were more lights, more uniforms, more pressure. Reed still stayed composed. He kept his hands visible. He answered what was relevant. He did not consent to a search. Harkins continued stretching the stop. He kept talking around the original reason. He kept trying to manufacture justification. Only after Harkins had already moved the stop into a power struggle did Reed state who he was. Reed explained that he was a federal judge and that he was off duty. He didn't say it like a threat. He didn't demand favors. He said it because the stop had stopped being normal, and he needed the deputy to understand he wasn't dealing with someone who would be intimidated into giving up rights, just to make the moment end. Harkins either didn't believe him or decided it didn't matter. His actions showed he was committed to winning the stop. He continued as if the identity was irrelevant. He kept the pressure on. He focused on dominance, not resolution. And this is where the foundation for everything that happened later got poured. Because Harkins wasn't just making choices on the roadside. He was creating a story he planned to put in writing, a report that would reframe calm behavior as suspicious, a report that would label normal questions as resistance, a report that would turn a lawful refusal to consent into a safety concern. Backup arrived behind Harkins a few minutes after the radio call. 2 cruisers on the shoulder for a tag light. Harkins had already told dispatch the driver was difficult and suspicious. So when the second unit showed up, Harkins acted like he needed to justify why he escalated. He walked back to the driver's window and pushed again for consent to search the car. He didn't keep it as a single request. He asked, got a refusal, then asked again in a different way, trying to make refusal sound unreasonable. Reed refused each time. He stayed polite. He stayed calm. He didn't argue. He didn't insult anyone. He simply didn't consent. Harkins treated that refusal like a challenge. His tone got sharper. He started describing Reed's behavior as a problem, even though Reed was still cooperating with the traffic stop itself. Then Harkins ordered Reed to step out of the vehicle. Reed complied. He moved slowly and kept his hands visible. He didn't make sudden reaches. He followed instructions. He stood where Harkins directed him. Harkins kept questioning him about things that had nothing to do with the tag light, where he'd been, where he was going, why he was out late. He repeated the same anything illegal in the car line in different forms. It was clear he was trying to find a reason to keep the stop going or pressure Reed into consent. Reed answered what was necessary and kept the rest short. He asked again whether he was being detained for anything beyond the equipment issue. Harkins didn't give a clear answer tied to a specific crime. He responded with more control language and continued acting like Reed's question itself was suspicious. At this point, Reed stated that he was an off-duty federal judge. He didn't say it like a threat. He didn't demand special treatment. He said it after Harkins had already stretched the stop, as a direct explanation for why Reed was staying careful and asking clear legal questions. Harkins didn't change course. He either didn't believe Reed or decided it didn't matter. He kept the stop on the same track. He continued treating Reed as suspicious based on refusal to consent and normal behavior. Harkins went back to his cruiser and wrote the citation. He took longer than the violation required, and he did not end the stop quickly once he had the documents and the reason for the stop established. He came back, issued the citation, and ended the stop like it was finished and under control. After Reed left, Harkins wrote his report to justify the escalation. He used exaggerated wording to make the extension of the stop sound reasonable. He described normal movements as suspicious. He described Reed's calm questions as resistance. He treated Reed's lawful refusal to consent as a safety concern. He wrote it in a way that made it sound like the situation had been risky from the start, not something he escalated after Reed wouldn't give consent. Reed didn't make a scene that night. He didn't go public. He documented the timeline while it was fresh and began requesting the official records tied to the stop: Bodycam, dashcam, dispatch audio, and the computer-aided dispatch timestamps. Reed requested the records the way a lawyer would, not the way an angry driver would. He didn't ask for favors. He asked for the complete file tied to the stop: Bodycam from Harkins, dashcam from the cruiser, dispatch audio, computer-aided dispatch logs that show when units were assigned, when backup was requested, and when the stop cleared. Those timestamps matter because they don't care about anyone's feelings. The first review didn't happen because Reed went public. It happened because once you request records the right way, the department has to treat it like an official matter. Someone has to pull the footage. Someone has to log it. Someone has to watch it. And the problem showed up fast. Harkins's report described a driver who was difficult and suspicious early in the stop. The video showed a driver who handed over documents, stayed calm, and didn't raise his voice. Harkins's report described escalating concern. The audio showed Harkins escalating after he heard a polite refusal to consent. The timing was worse. The computer-aided dispatch and dashcam time markers showed how long Harkins stayed on that roadside before he even started writing the citation. The report made it sound like suspicion developed naturally and quickly. The logs showed long stretches where Harkins was doing nothing that advanced a taglight citation. He was talking, pressing, repeating questions, waiting, holding time. That matters because the legal limit is simple. A traffic stop can't be prolonged for unrelated investigation without a real reason, not a vibe, not he didn't want to consent, not he asked if he was being detained. The timeline showed the stop got longer because Harkins wanted more than a taglight citation. Dispatch audio created another issue. On the radio, Harkins framed Reed as difficult and suspicious before any concrete event happened that would justify that label. When backup arrived, the scene didn't match what Harkins had sold. No yelling, no threats, no refusal to provide documents, no aggressive movements, just a calm driver standing where he was told. Now, Harkins's report wasn't just off in tone. It was inconsistent with multiple sources that all lined up with each other. Then the review moved from, did this stop get messy, to, did the deputy write something that isn't true? Because the report language wasn't small exaggerations. It was the type of wording departments rely on to justify escalation. Furtive movements, evasive answers, non-compliant behavior, officer safety concerns. Those phrases are supposed to match observable facts. The footage didn't support them. Reed's suspicious movements were slow reaches for documents and normal posture shifts. His evasive answers were short, polite answers to questions that weren't required. His resistance was a lawful refusal to consent and a calm question about detention status. And the judge part, that created a separate track. Once Reed's identity was confirmed through official channels, the department couldn't treat it like a random complaint. Not because he was important, because he was credible, he was careful, and he was clearly documenting. That forces seriousness. So the supervisor had to decide, treat this like a normal stop review or dig deeper and risk finding a bigger problem. Internal affairs got involved. They compared the report to the footage line by line. They pulled the dispatch log. They looked at when Harkins called for backup and what he said. They looked at whether any actual reason existed to extend the stop beyond writing the citation. And that's when Harkins' story started collapsing in a way that's hard to fix, because you can't argue with time. Harkins tried the usual defense when confronted with this kind of review. He leaned on training and experience. He leaned on "I felt unsafe." He leaned on totality of circumstances. Those phrases work when there's at least something on video to point to. Here, there wasn't. Now, the department had an officer whose written narrative didn't match the recordings. That's not just a bad stop. That's credibility damage. And once credibility becomes the issue, it spreads beyond one incident. Because supervisors start asking an uncomfortable question. If he wrote the stop up this way, how many other stops did he write up the same way? Internal affairs didn't treat this like a weird stop with a fancy driver. They treated it like a credibility problem. Because once an officer's report doesn't match the video, the department has two options: ignore it and pray it never blows up in court, or dig in and see how deep it goes. They dug. First, they pulled Harkins' history, prior complaints, stops that ran long, situations where drivers said he kept pushing for searches and then wrote them up like they were the issue. Then they opened his old reports, and that's where the pattern started looking obvious. Same wording kept showing up across different stops. It didn't look like fresh observations. It looked like a reusable story template that made every stop sound risky, even when nothing actually happened. IA picked several past incidents where footage still existed and compared it to the narratives. They didn't need 50 examples. A few were enough. The video showed regular drivers doing regular things, asking what they were being stopped for, moving slowly to hand over documents, saying no to a search. The reports described those same moments like the drivers were escalating and the deputy was forced to respond. That's the point where a department stops debating, did he handle it well? And starts asking, can we trust this guy in court? Because court is where this becomes expensive. If a defense attorney can show a jury that an officer inflates facts in reports, every case that officer touches becomes a problem. Prosecutors stop wanting them as witnesses. Judges start questioning their testimony. Cases get challenged. Some get dropped. The county gets nervous. Harkins tried to explain the Reed stop the way officers usually do when video doesn't help them. He leaned on instincts and officer safety. He argued that the refusal and the questions made him unsure about what he was dealing with. He insisted he did what he was trained to do. But none of that fixed the timeline. The log showed he extended the stop before any real suspicion existed. The radio call happened right after Reed refused consent and asked if he was being detained beyond the traffic issue. The footage didn't show the difficult driver dispatch was warned about. It showed a calm adult holding steady while Harkins kept trying to escalate. The department couldn't frame it as a misunderstanding anymore. Not with the recordings, not with the repeated report language, not with other complaints suddenly making sense in hindsight. So the discipline moved fast once it hit the honesty issue. Harkins was terminated for policy violations, tied to prolonging stops and for writing a narrative that wasn't supported by the evidence. And because truthfulness is the foundation of being an officer witness, it didn't stop at getting fired. The decertification process started too, which meant he wasn't just losing this job. He was losing the easy path to another badge. This is the part people miss. He didn't go down because Reed was a judge. He went down because Reed handled it like a judge. No public scene. No roadside threats. No social media campaign. Reed preserved the facts, pulled the records, and forced the department to look at the stop the way a courtroom would look at it. And that dragged the deputy's whole pattern into the light. After that, the fallout spread beyond one person. Supervisors had to explain why earlier complaints didn't lead to tighter oversight. Training got updated around stop duration and consent search pressure. Internal review protocols changed, so template suspicion language started triggering extra scrutiny. The county also had to brace for defense motions in cases where Harkins had been a key witness, because now his credibility was officially damaged. Reed didn't take a victory lap. He got what he wanted, the record, to be honest, and the system to stop pretending this was acceptable. So here's the question for you. If you were in that car, would you have tried to argue your way out on the shoulder, or would you have done what Reed did? Stay calm, document everything, and let the footage bury the lies. Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more stories where accountability comes from facts, policy, and recordings, not shouting, make sure you subscribe.
Move back. Let me see your ID.
Officer, what's wrong?
I gave you an order. Do what I said.
I'll comply with the lawful detention. What crime are you investigating?
You're being non-compliant right now.
Lawful instructions require lawful grounds.
Have something illegal here?
This patrol officer thought he was just teaching a lesson to a suspicious driver. He ignored federal credentials, refused to verify them, and kept escalating a routine stop into a hostile detention. Then the officer's whole posture changed, because the first set of federal SUVs started turning onto the frontage road, and the radio traffic stopped sounding local. He was about to learn he had just handcuffed an undercover DEA agent. Real quick, where are you watching from? What country or what state? Drop it in the comments. And if you like stories where arrogance meets cameras, paperwork, and real accountability, hit like and subscribe. Now back to what happened. By the time anyone driving past could tell something was wrong, the stop had already turned into a control scene. The officer, Cameron Voss, had the driver out of the car and positioned where Voss wanted him. Voss stood close, kept his voice hard, and kept giving rapid instructions designed to keep the driver reacting instead of thinking. The driver, Devin Cole, didn't match the picture Voss was trying to paint. Cole stayed composed. His hands stayed visible. His movements stayed slow. He didn't argue in circles. He repeated one request and one request only. Verify his federal credentials through the proper channel and stop treating the stop like an interrogation. Voss didn't take the easy exit. He treated the credentials like a prop. He dismissed the ID as something anyone could buy. He ignored the fact that there was a standard way to confirm federal status, and he ignored it on purpose. You could see it in the way he kept the situation moving forward instead of pausing to check. He wasn't trying to confirm the truth. He was trying to force a confession to something he hadn't proven. Cole had been working undercover for the DEA as part of a federal task force. That meant his car wasn't a marked unit. His clothes weren't tactical. His day didn't look like law enforcement to strangers. That's the whole point of undercover work. It's also why verification exists, because local traffic enforcement will occasionally bump into federal work, and the system is supposed to prevent exactly this kind of collision. Voss treated that reality like it was a challenge to his authority. The stop started in the most predictable way possible. Commercial strip, warehouses and gas stations, early evening with steady traffic. So there were plenty of witnesses, even if nobody intended to be one. Voss claimed a minor reason to pull Cole over, the kind of vague justification that shows up in thousands of body cams. Slight lane drift, equipment issue, vehicle matches a general description. Nothing that should have turned into cuffs. Cole pulled over cleanly and immediately. No delay, no sudden moves. When Voss walked up, he didn't approach like a neutral professional assessing risk. He approached like someone who had already decided the driver was a problem. Cole did what trained agents do during unexpected contact. He stayed calm and controlled the tempo. He didn't rummage around. He didn't escalate with attitude. He gave standard identification. Then he provided federal credentials in a way that kept everyone safe and kept the interaction clear. That should have triggered a simple sequence. Voss should have stepped back, called it in, asked dispatch to verify, and if he didn't know the right method, he should have called a supervisor It would have taken minutes. Voss did the opposite. He started stacking commands. He pushed Cole out of the vehicle and started asking questions that weren't traffic related. He tried to get Cole talking about where he was going, who he was meeting, why he was in that area, and what he had in the car. He kept circling back to the same suspicion, even though he hadn't developed probable cause for anything beyond the stop. Cole didn't get pulled into it. He stayed focused on verification and boundaries. He kept insisting Voss either confirm the credentials properly or call a supervisor who would. That refusal to play along annoyed Voss. You could hear it in his tone and see it in his posture. The questions became sharper. The space between them tightened. The officer's safety language started showing up, not as a real response to a threat, but as a justification for control. Then Voss made the decision that turned a bad stop into a major problem. He handcuffed Cole. He didn't do it because Cole attacked him. He didn't do it because Cole tried to run. He did it because Cole wouldn't submit to an improvised interrogation, and Voss didn't like being told, verify it. The cuffs changed everything. It created a detention that had to be justified later, and it created a paper trail that would include bodycam footage, dispatch logs, and supervisor involvement. Cole stayed controlled even then, because he had two problems at the same time. He had to keep himself safe and protect his identity, but he also had to avoid blowing an active operation. Undercover work has real timing. It has real people in motion. When you miss a check-in window, it doesn't stay private for long. That's what Voss didn't understand. He thought he was dealing with a driver who would eventually fold. Cole's task force had a schedule. Cole missed it. Someone noticed. While Voss kept pressing and refusing to verify, the other side of the system started waking up. People called, people checked. People asked where Cole was and why he wasn't answering. The longer Voss dragged it out, the more attention the stop attracted from people with authority he couldn't wave off. The moment the shift began, it didn't start with sirens. It started with Voss's radio. The radio traffic changed tone because a supervisor got involved. Not the casual kind of, what's going on over there, but the clipped, urgent kind, where someone has already heard enough to be concerned. The supervisor told Voss to stop escalating, hold position, and wait for verification. Voss didn't comply the way he should have. He pushed back on the radio, still acting like he had the bigger picture, still acting like the credentials were a lie, still acting like the detention was his call alone. And right after that, headlights swept across the scene from the side road, followed by the unmistakable shape of federal SUVs pulling in with purpose. Federal vehicles started arriving within minutes of the supervisor radio traffic, and the difference was obvious even to people who didn't know law enforcement. These weren't random patrol units responding to a suspicious person call. They were coordinated task force vehicles, and the people getting out of them moved with purpose and clear roles. Officer Derek Halverson saw the first one pull in behind his cruiser and tightened up. He kept Jamal Mercer in handcuffs near the shoulder, angled away from the car, the way officers do when they want full control of someone's movement and sightline. Halverson kept talking as if the scene was still his, as if the arrival of new units didn't change the rules. Mercer didn't react. He didn't try to talk over anyone. He stayed still, kept his breathing controlled, and kept his hands where they were supposed to be. He'd already done the key thing. He'd identified himself as federal and asked Halverson to verify it the correct way. The fact that this had gone on long enough for backup to arrive told Mercer exactly what kind of officer he was dealing with. Two people stepped out of the first federal SUV. They weren't dressed like patrol. They weren't aggressive. They were plainclothes with clear identifiers, and they immediately started doing what Halverson should have done from the start: establish facts, establish verification, and control the risk without turning it into a personal dominance contest. One of them approached Halverson and asked for the detention bases and what verification steps had been taken. Not a debate, basic accountability questions. Halverson answered with the usual shield language. He described Mercer as suspicious, said Mercer was evasive, and implied the credentials were questionable. He leaned on officer safety while avoiding the one point that mattered. He still hadn't verified the credentials through dispatch, a supervisor, or any recognized federal contact channel. The federal agent pressed him on specifics. What information did Halverson call in? Did dispatch confirm anything? Did he request a supervisor before using cuffs? Did he document any articulable threat that justified a custodial detention during a traffic stop? Halverson didn't have clean answers. He tried to redirect the conversation towards feelings and assumptions. He kept describing what he believed Mercer might be. That's where officers get themselves in trouble, because feelings don't hold up against recordings. At the same time, the people arriving didn't swarm Halverson or treat him like an enemy. They treated him like a local officer who had created a preventable problem and needed to be managed before he made it worse. More federal vehicles arrived. A couple unmarked SUVs. A marked unit tied to the task force. The perimeter tightened, not in a theatrical way, but in a practical way. Traffic control, witness management, safety spacing, and a clear line of authority forming around the situation. Halverson started realizing his story wasn't landing the way it usually did. With regular callers and regular stops, he could talk fast, sound confident, and rely on the assumption that the detained person must have done something. Here, the arriving agents weren't buying tone. They wanted process and proof. Halverson tried to regain control by increasing pressure on Mercer. He repeated commands toward him, warned him about making it worse, and acted like Mercer's calm was a problem. Mercer didn't give him the reaction he wanted. Mercer stayed steady and kept repeating the same boundary. Federal agent, credentials presented, verify through proper channels. Then Halverson's own department radio traffic started cutting through again, louder and more direct. His supervisor's voice wasn't casual anymore. The supervisor told Halverson to stop escalating, maintain distance, and wait for verification. The supervisor also asked a direct question about whether Halverson had placed Mercer in cuffs and why. Halverson answered on the radio in a way that sounded defensive, and that's important because radio logs become evidence too. If you contradict yourself, you don't only contradict yourself on camera, you contradict yourself in the official record. A federal supervisor arrived next, and the structure of the scene changed immediately. She identified herself clearly, then addressed Halverson like someone who had already reviewed enough information to know this was out of bounds. She asked why a claimed federal agent was handcuffed without verification, and why Halverson had ignored the supervisor instruction to hold and confirm. Halverson tried to justify it again with suspicion language. He said the ID looked wrong. He said Mercer wasn't cooperating the way he wanted. He said Mercer's behavior made him uneasy. The federal supervisor didn't argue, and she asked for the verification attempt. She asked for the dispatch confirmation. She asked for the documented reason a traffic stop turned into a custodial detention. She asked if Halverson searched the vehicle or attempted to. Halverson had almost nothing to produce. The whole situation existed because he chose not to verify early and chose force instead. The federal supervisor then turned to Mercer and asked him basic welfare and integrity questions. Was he okay? Had any property been handled? Had the vehicle been accessed? Had he been forced to reveal anything compromising? Mercer answered in the controlled, limited way an undercover agent has to answer. He confirmed he presented credentials, requested verification, and warned the detention was interfering with active federal work. He did not discuss targets or operation details. At that point, the federal supervisor gave a direct instruction to remove the handcuffs. One of the agents stepped in and removed them carefully. No drama, no speeches, just correction and control returning to the proper place. Mercer rolled his wrists once, not to show off, but because cuffs hurt when they've been on longer than they should have been. Halverson stood there watching it happen, and now you could see the shift in him. He wasn't confident anymore. He wasn't performing anymore. He was calculating. He was trying to figure out how to explain a decision that was recorded from multiple angles, contradicted by his own radio traffic, and now confirmed as wrong by people who had the authority to say it on the spot. He tried to backpedal. He claimed he didn't know. He claimed he couldn't verify. He claimed he had to act fast. None of that fixed the central issue. He refused the verification pathway when it was offered, then he escalated anyway. As soon as the cuffs came off, the scene stopped being a debate and started being documentation. The federal supervisor didn't waste time arguing with Derek Halverson. She treated him like a risk factor that needed to be contained. She told her people to secure Mercer's vehicle area without touching anything that could compromise the operation. She told another agent to start a timeline while everything was still fresh. That included the stop time, the moment credentials were presented, the moment Halverson refused verification, the moment he escalated to cuffs, and the moment his own supervisor ordered him to pause. Halverson tried to keep talking. He kept trying to shape the narrative in real time. He kept repeating the same justifications in different words, hoping one version would stick. It wasn't working. His own supervisor arrived from the local side, and the supervisor didn't come in to back him automatically. The supervisor came in to manage damage. That's what a smart supervisor does when they hear a stop has turned into a potential civil rights issue with federal involvement. The supervisor asked Halverson for his Bodycam status first, not his opinion. Status. Was it recording the entire time? Was it activated before contact? Did he pause it? Did he move it? Simple questions that tell you whether someone knew they were wrong. Halverson answered, and the supervisor immediately told dispatch to preserve the audio and logs. That meant the initial call reason, the unit arrival times, Halverson's radio responses, and the moment he was told to stand down. Those recordings don't care about anyone's pride. They're just there, and they don't forget. Mercer stayed close to the federal group, but kept his focus on the operation problem, not the ego problem. A detention like this can blow an undercover timeline in seconds. If he missed a meet or a surveillance handoff, targets could move. If local units started running his name through systems or broadcasting his status incorrectly, it could leak into channels that were never supposed to have it. The federal supervisor handled that part cleanly. She asked for only the information needed to keep Mercer safe and keep the case intact. She didn't ask him to explain the whole investigation on the roadside. She didn't pressure him to say anything that would end up on local body cam footage. That contrast mattered. Halverson had tried to force Mercer into talking. The DEA team moved like they understood rules, risk, and containment. Halverson kept hovering near the conversation like he deserved a seat at the table. He didn't. He had already shown he couldn't be trusted with sensitive information. Now the accountability part started showing itself in small, concrete actions. The supervisor told Halverson to step back and wait by his cruiser. That instruction wasn't punishment. It was control. It also created a clean separation on camera. Federal personnel handling their agent, local leadership handling their officer. Halverson didn't like it. He tried to argue the instruction. He tried to suggest the federal people were overreacting. That was another mistake. Every extra word gave the recordings more material. Then came the moment where the bias stopped being implied and started being obvious, even without slurs. Halverson tried to justify the stop by describing Mercer in terms that didn't match the objective facts. He leaned into stereotypes about criminal behavior, kept talking about the kind of person he thought he had, and framed Mercer's calm, credentialed response as manipulative. It was the kind of reasoning you hear when an officer isn't reacting to behavior, but to an assumption about who the person is. The federal supervisor didn't let that pass. She didn't need to quote policy like a robot. She cut to the core. Halverson had been offered a verification pathway early, and he refused it. He escalated anyway. He kept escalating after his own supervisor told him to stop. That isn't policing. That's ego overriding procedure. Mercer's team started collecting identifiers quietly. Badge number, unit assignment, names of responding officers, witness locations, body cam confirmation for everyone on scene. That's how these incidents become cases, not by yelling, by preserving evidence and narrowing facts until excuses have nowhere to hide. Halverson's supervisor called for another unit to take over Halverson's patrol responsibilities for the rest of the shift. That's an immediate signal. It means leadership already expects this to go beyond a simple coaching conversation. It also means they want Halverson off the street before he makes a second bad decision. Halverson tried to negotiate his way out of that too. He suggested it was unnecessary. He acted like he was being treated unfairly, and nobody cared. Not anymore. The federal supervisor told Halverson's supervisor that this wasn't staying local. She made it clear the detention interfered with a DOJ-linked operation and involved a credentialed federal agent being restrained without verification. That's the kind of fact pattern that triggers federal interest fast, especially when there's body cam. Mercer didn't celebrate. He didn't taunt. He didn't need to. His win wasn't emotional, it was structural. The truth was recorded and the right people were now in the loop. Before Mercer left the scene, the federal supervisor did one more thing that mattered. She ensured Mercer's vehicle wasn't searched by local officers. If Halverson had touched anything, it would become a chain of custody issue. It would create exposure risk for the case. It would also create another legal problem for the department. Halverson's supervisor asked Halverson a direct question about whether he attempted a search or opened any doors. Halverson gave an answer that didn't sound confident, and that hesitation landed badly. When someone is sure they followed policy, they don't hesitate on basic facts. Mercer was moved away from the shoulder and into the federal vehicle area briefly so his team could do a quick welfare check and get him back on track. His phone and communication plan got adjusted. His task force would reroute the operation if needed. They weren't going to gamble the case because one patrol officer wanted to feel powerful during a traffic stop. Halverson watched Mercer leave the immediate detention space and realized the scene had ended without him being the hero of his own story. He wasn't the authority figure anymore. He was the problem that had to be managed. And right there, still on the roadside, the supervisor told Halverson he was being pulled from duty pending review. Not a future promise, a now action. He was instructed to keep his body cam on, remain available, and prepare a written statement. That's the beginning of consequences. The local department opened a formal internal affairs case and immediately locked down evidence. They pulled the primary officer's body cam, any secondary officer cams, dash video if it existed, dispatch audio, and supervisor radio traffic. They also pulled the officer's stop history for patterns, how often his routine stops turned into detentions, how often he used cuffs without an arrest, how often supervisors had to correct him. The officer got taken off the street while the review ran. Administrative leave is standard because it prevents a second incident and it keeps the investigation clean. Then they ordered a written statement, not a casual explanation, a documented account that gets compared to video, second by second. Internal affairs focused on a short list of questions. Did the driver present federal credentials? Did the officer take any real steps to verify them? Was there an actual safety threat that justified handcuffs? Did the officer follow supervisor direction once told to stop and wait? Did the officer try to search the vehicle or pressure for information outside the scope of a traffic stop? If the answers don't line up with the footage, the case becomes simple. The officer's intent stops mattering. His actions become the issue. On the federal side, the response stayed blunt and procedural. They treated it as interference risk. They requested the same evidence package, documented the operational disruption in general terms, and elevated it through the proper channels. When a local officer refuses to verify and escalates anyway, it's not just bad judgment. It's a trust failure between agencies, and federal leadership takes that personally because it puts people and cases at risk. Then the fallout split into 3 lanes. Lane 1, discipline. The department moved towards suspension or termination based on policy violations that are easy to prove on recordings. Failure to verify, improper escalation, and ignoring supervision. Union process can slow it down, but it can't rewrite video. Lane 2, civil rights exposure. The agent's side pursued accountability through legal channels. The core argument wasn't complicated. Credentials were presented, verification was available, and the officer escalated anyway. If bias indicators show up in tone, assumptions, or inconsistent justification, it strengthens the case that this wasn't a neutral mistake. Lane 3, command level changes. The department had to show it learned something, because this kind of incident makes everyone look incompetent. So they tightened procedures, where ego usually hides. Mandatory credential verification steps before escalation required supervisor involvement. When a stop extends past a set time or turns into cuffs. Automatic review when cuffs are used without an arrest. Clear discipline triggers for refusing verification and for defying supervisor orders. Clearer interagency contact pathways so local supervisors can confirm federal status quickly. Federal task forces also adjusted their side. Better check-in rules, faster missing contact triggers, and clearer emergency verification, so a single patrol officer can't trap an undercover agent in a roadside mess again. In the end, the officer didn't get to frame it as a misunderstanding. He created a record. Cameras, radio logs, and supervisor instructions pinned it down. That record followed him into internal affairs, into legal review, and into whatever discipline came next. And the agent didn't win by outshouting anyone. He won because he stayed controlled, stuck to verification, and let the system document the failure. That's the whole point of accountability stories like this. Power works until there's proof. Proof changes everything. If you've ever been in a situation where someone in authority ignored facts and kept escalating anyway, say it in the comments. Where did it happen, and how did it end? And if you want more stories like this, realistic, modern, and focused on consequences, subscribe.
Stop right there. Put the bags down.
Down. The case stays with me. It's classified.
I don't care what you say it is. Put it
You
down.
can verify my
I'm
credentials
not
and call a
authorized to
supervisor.
surrender classified material.
This airport cop thought he was stopping another passenger he could push around for a few minutes. He had no idea the man in front of him was a black military commander carrying classified federal material after being pulled out of a live overseas operation. He saw the uniform, the injuries, the case, and still decided none of it made sense to him. That decision wrecked his career and dragged his department into a federal case. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you like stories where abuse of power gets exposed in public, like and subscribe. This one started with a stop in a crowded airport and ended with prison time. Adrian Cross was moving through Phoenix Sky Harbor on a Sunday evening, trying to make a connection and finish the last part of a military transfer. Less than 72 hours earlier, he had been extracted from hostile territory after a combat mission went bad. Several men had been wounded, command changed his route, and sent him back to the United States under tight security. He looked like a man who had just come out of something serious. He had not slept properly in almost 2 days. His right hand was wrapped from an injury during extraction. A cut near his eyebrow was still healing. Under his arm, he carried a sealed, classified case. Over his shoulder, he had a duffel bag packed in a rush before transport. He wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't causing any problem. He was walking from one terminal connection to the next. The terminal was full. Delayed passengers were crowded near the gates. Families were coming back from trips. Flight crews were moving between terminals. Announcements kept cutting through the noise. People were checking phones, dragging luggage, and trying to get home. Adrian kept moving through all of it at a steady pace. His uniform was still neat. His face showed the strain. Anyone paying normal attention would have seen an injured officer in transit. Officer Brent Hollis saw something else. Hollis had spent years in airport policing. He also had a reputation, even if the department never dealt with it properly. Black and Latino travelers had filed complaints before. They said he stopped them more often, pushed harder, and treated routine encounters like personal tests. None of that had changed his position. When he saw Adrian, he made a decision before saying a word. In his mind, Adrian did not look like the kind of man who should be traveling alone with high-level military credentials and a sealed case. That was the real reason for the stop. Hollis stepped in front of him near the gate corridor and blocked his path. Foot traffic had to move around them. Then he started questioning him. He wanted to know where Adrian was coming from, what was in the case, why he was injured, and why he was traveling alone. Adrian stayed calm. He gave only the information he was allowed to give. He presented military identification and travel documents. He explained that he was in transit under orders. He also made one point clear right away. The sealed case contained classified military material, and he could not hand it over to civilian law enforcement without proper authorization. That should have settled the next step. A professional officer would verify the credentials through the proper channel and move on. Hollis didn't do that. He looked over Adrian's identification with open suspicion. He turned it over in his hands and studied it like he had already decided it was fake. He did not try to verify it through official channels. He kept talking to Adrian like he had caught him in a lie. Adrian didn't rise to it. He stayed controlled and repeated only what he was authorized to say. When it became clear Hollis was not handling this properly, Adrian asked for a supervisor. That request made the stop worse. Hollis treated it like a challenge. His tone got sharper. He moved closer. He repeated the same questions and kept pushing for the case. Adrian gave him nothing extra. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He did not make any sudden move. Then Hollis ordered him to put everything on the ground, including the sealed case. Adrian lowered the duffel bag. He kept hold of the case. Calmly, he repeated that he was not authorized to surrender classified military material. That was a lawful answer. It was also the moment Hollis stopped acting like this was a security check and started turning it into a power play. People nearby had started watching, not because Adrian made a scene, because Hollis did. His voice carried across the gate area. Travelers slowed down. A few stopped completely. Some looked at Adrian's uniform, then at the officer, and could tell the situation was going in the wrong direction. Adrian asked for a supervisor again. Hollis ignored him and repeated the order. Adrian held his position, still calm, still compliant in every way that did not violate military protocol. He had shown identification. He had explained his status. He had not threatened anyone. He had not resisted. None of that mattered to Hollis anymore. At that point, the stop was no longer about security. It was about control. Hollis had decided Adrian was not the man his credentials said he was, and he was going to force the situation until Adrian submitted. That was the last moment before it turned physical. Hollis made the move first. He grabbed Adrian's injured arm and twisted hard. Not a guiding hold. Not a standard control move on a resisting suspect. He went straight at the damaged arm of a man who had been standing still, speaking clearly, and asking for a supervisor. Adrian lost balance immediately. His shoulder hit the floor first, then his knees, then the side of his face. The bandaging on his hand tore open. The cut near his eyebrow split again on impact. The sealed case came loose and slid several feet across the polished tile toward a waiting area full of passengers. That changed the scene instantly. A few seconds earlier, people had seen a tense stop. Now they were watching an injured, uniformed commander bleeding on an airport floor, while an officer yelled at him to stay down even though he had not rushed anyone, swung at anyone, or tried to run. A second officer moved in and helped pin him instead of stopping it. That made it worse. Adrian kept saying he was not resisting. He said it clearly. He said it while face down. He said it while one arm was pinned and the other was already injured. He did not threaten them. He did not curse them out. He did not try to turn the struggle into some loud scene. He kept trying to state the obvious facts while they kept forcing him lower. People around them started reacting all at once. Some froze, some backed away. Some started shouting that he was not doing anything. Others pulled out their phones and began recording. That part mattered because once multiple angles hit the internet later, The department lost any chance to hide behind a vague incident report. And the body cam made it even worse for Hollis. It captured the full sequence: the questioning, the ignored credentials, the request for a supervisor, the refusal to verify anything properly, the order to surrender the sealed case, then the takedown. Anyone reviewing that footage could see the gap between Adrian's behavior and Hollis's response. There was no real threat to explain it away. The sealed case sitting exposed on the terminal floor turned this from misconduct into something much bigger. That case was not supposed to be out in public like that. Not in the middle of a crowded airport corridor. Not within sight of random travelers holding up phones. Not after a civilian officer had forced it out of the hands of the person assigned to move it. Nobody around that scene knew what was in it. That was the point. They were not supposed to know. But now airport police had created a public security problem where there had been none. Hollis still acted like he was in control. That's what reckless officers do when they realize too late that they've gone too far. They double down and hope force will cover the mistake. He kept shouting commands at Adrian as if noise could justify what the footage was already showing. It couldn't. Passengers had gathered far enough back to avoid getting dragged in, but close enough to see everything clearly. Some were yelling for the officers to stop. One man kept saying Adrian had already shown ID. A woman near the gate seating said they were hurting an injured serviceman for no reason. A flight crew member stood off to the side and watched the sealed case with the kind of expression people get when they know something is deeply wrong, even if they do not know the exact rules being broken. Then Sergeant Lena Mercer arrived. She did not need a full briefing. One look told her enough. She saw Adrian on the floor in cuffs, bleeding through reopened injuries. She saw his military identification being treated like it meant nothing. She saw the sealed case separated from him in a public terminal. She saw passengers recording. She saw the second officer helping hold down a man who was clearly under control already. Mercer understood the scale of the mistake immediately. This was no longer a local airport stop. This was a wounded military commander in uniform, in transit under orders, handled with force in public, while carrying classified federal material. That alone was catastrophic. Add Bodycam, civilian recordings, and a terminal full of witnesses. And now the whole thing was already bigger than the department. Mercer stepped in fast and took over. She ordered the officers to remove the handcuffs. She secured the sealed case herself instead of leaving it exposed. She demanded Adrian's credentials back. She called Airport Command and started locking the scene down before anyone could keep freelancing and make it worse. Hollis tried to hold onto the stop for a few more seconds. Officers like him always do. He started framing it as a suspicious encounter, tried to justify the force, and pushed the idea that Adrian had failed to comply. Mercer shut that down. The facts were too visible. Adrian had produced valid military identification. He had explained the limits of his authority over the case. He had asked for a supervisor. He had lowered the duffel bag when ordered. He had not made any threatening move. The public had seen all of that. The cameras had seen all of that. Hollis was standing inside his own problem with no room left to reshape it. Adrian was helped back to his feet. By then, blood was visible on the floor where he had hit. His hand wrapping had come apart. The cut near his eyebrow was open again. He looked like a man who had just survived one extraction overseas and then got slammed onto an airport floor back home by people who could not accept what his credentials already proved. Mercer got medical support moving, but she also had another crisis on her hands. The case had to be secured. The chain around it had to be documented. Every second after that takedown created more questions. Who had touched it? Who had been close to it? What had been visible? What had been recorded? Which officers had handled material they had no authority to handle? That is where local control started ending. Airport Command got pulled in. Then military contacts. then federal personnel. Fast. This wasn't because Adrian was important in some vague, symbolic way. It was because the stop triggered 3 separate disasters at once: a civil rights problem, an assault problem, a classified material problem. Once the right people were notified, the tone changed immediately. Nobody from the military side treated this like a misunderstanding. Nobody from the federal side saw it as a routine use of force question. The facts were too bad, too clear, and too well recorded. And Hollis had another problem coming that he still didn't fully understand. This was not going to stay inside the airport. Passengers were already uploading clips before supervisors finished their first calls. The footage showed enough to spark outrage on its own. A black officer in uniform, visibly injured, pinned to the ground while saying he was not resisting. Once people learned he was a military commander carrying classified material under orders, the story was going to hit a much harder level. By the end of that night, the department was no longer asking how to explain the incident. It was asking how much video was out there, how many prior complaints were now going to come back, and whether Brent Hollis had just exposed years of things they had chosen not to deal with. The story got out before the department could control it. By that night, passenger videos were already moving across social media. People did not need a long explanation to understand what they were looking at. A black officer in uniform, visibly injured, was taken down in a crowded airport while saying he was not resisting. That alone was bad enough. Then more details came out. He was not just any service member. He was Commander Adrian Cross. He had just returned from an overseas combat operation. He was carrying classified material under orders when airport police put him on the floor and let that case slide across a public terminal. After that, the department lost the story. Bodycam footage made it worse. It backed up the main facts instead of helping the officers. It showed Adrian presenting valid military identification. It showed him staying calm. It showed him asking for a supervisor. It showed Hollis pushing past all of that and turning a controlled stop into a forced takedown. Once investigators saw the footage, there was no serious way to frame this as confusion. Military authorities moved fast. Federal investigators did too. They were not just looking at the assault. They were looking at the exposure of classified material, the failure to verify federal credentials, and the fact that a civilian airport officer had overridden basic procedure because he did not believe the person in front of him. That point stayed at the center of everything. Hollis had not uncovered a fake officer. He had ignored a real one. That made the case cleaner for prosecutors later because it stripped away the usual excuses. This was not a fast-moving fight, not a bad split-second read, not a crowded scene misfire. He had time to look at the identification, time to call it in, time to get a supervisor, time to slow down. He chose none of that. And once the case got attention, older stories started coming back. Black travelers, Latino travelers. Men stopped near gates. Families questioned too aggressively. Passengers who said Hollis acted like ordinary movement through the airport was suspicious when the wrong people were doing it. Some had filed complaints and heard nothing back. Some never filed because they assumed nothing would happen. Some came forward only after seeing Adrian's case and realizing this officer had been doing the same thing for years. That opened the next problem. Investigators pulled internal records, complaint logs, email traffic, shift notes, prior review summaries. What they found was ugly, but not surprising. Hollis had not been some unknown risk hidden deep inside the system. Supervisors had known he generated repeated complaints tied to race. They had known he escalated ordinary encounters. They had known his stops were not affecting all travelers the same way. He stayed in position anyway. Why? Because on paper, he looked productive. He made stops. He wrote reports. He created numbers management could point to. That matters in bad departments more than judgment ever does. A reckless officer who fills spreadsheets often gets protected longer than a careful one who avoids bad stops in the first place. So this stopped being one-man misconduct. It turned into a department case. Federal investigators started asking why earlier complaints had gone nowhere, why no one had corrected the pattern, why someone with that history remained in a public-facing airport role. Internal leadership had weak answers because there were no good ones. The deeper the review went, the clearer it became that Hollis had been allowed to operate this way, because the system around him tolerated it. Adrian stayed disciplined through all of it. He got medical treatment. His hand had to be rewrapped. The reopened cut near his eyebrow was documented along with bruising from the takedown. He gave his statement carefully and through the right channels. He did not overstate anything. He did not need to. The footage did the work. The witnesses did the work. The records did the work. That helped him. People trust the person who keeps the facts straight while everyone else starts scrambling. Adrian did that from the beginning. Same tone in the terminal. Same tone after. He said what happened, what he had shown, what he had refused, and why. No extra drama. No performance. Just a clean record against a dirty one. The public response kept building. Veterans groups spoke up. Civil rights attorneys spoke up. Former travelers who had dealt with Hollis started sharing their own stories publicly. Local reporters started pulling complaint histories and asking questions the department had avoided for years. Once that happened, airport leadership could not hide behind internal review language anymore. The issue was out in the open and widening. And Hollis was done, whether he understood it yet or not. He was pulled from duty first, then suspended, then formally fired once the early reviews and footage lined up. Losing the badge was only the start. The criminal side was moving too. Federal prosecutors were already looking at the assault, the civil rights angle, and the misuse of authority under color of law. That combination was serious, because now the government was not just saying he handled a stop badly. It was saying he used official power to unlawfully target, detain, and assault someone who had done nothing to justify it. That is a different level of case. Harder to explain away. Harder to defend in front of a jury. The classified case made it even worse for him. He had no authority to demand it the way he did. No authority to force that transfer in the middle of a terminal. No authority to create the security risk that followed. Once federal personnel mapped out the chain of events, that became another piece of proof that Hollis was not acting carefully or lawfully. He was forcing compliance first and thinking later. That works until cameras are rolling and the victim's paperwork is real. Then everything flips. By that point, the airport department was no longer dealing with one scandal. It was dealing with three at once. A public civil rights scandal, a federal criminal case, an internal exposure problem involving years of ignored warning signs. Leadership started making defensive statements, but they sounded hollow because the facts were already ahead of them. The footage had pinned them down, and the longer the review went, the clearer it became that Adrian Cross had walked into that terminal, carrying classified material from a dangerous mission, only to run into the one kind of threat he should not have had to deal with back home. An officer who thought his own bias outranked the credentials in his hand. Once the federal case moved forward, Hollis was finished. The video showed Adrian presenting valid military ID, staying calm, asking for a supervisor, and refusing only one thing: handing over classified material without authorization. That was legal. Hollis ignored all of it and used force anyway. Prosecutors built the case around that choice. They showed he had time to verify the credentials and chose not to. He had time to call a supervisor and refused. He treated Adrian like a liar because he did not believe a black man in front of him could actually hold that level of military authority. Then the old complaints came back. Black and Latino travelers described the same pattern: aggressive stops, humiliation, suspicion with no real basis. Internal records showed supervisors already knew Hollis had a history and kept him in that airport role anyway. That hurt the department badly Now it was no longer one bad stop. It was a pattern they had protected. Hollis was fired, lost his badge, and was prosecuted in federal court. The body cam, passenger videos, witness statements, and prior complaints left him little room. He was convicted on charges tied to unlawful assault, civil rights violations, and abuse of authority. He was sent to prison for several years. Adrian was fully cleared and backed by the official record. His injuries were documented. His account matched the footage. Military leadership confirmed he had acted within protocol the whole time. There was also a large civil settlement. The department had to change procedures after that. Complaint reviews were tightened. Body cam audits increased. Officers with repeated bias complaints got closer scrutiny. Leadership was forced to answer for why Hollis had been left in place for so long. That is what made this case bigger than one officer. Hollis thought he was stopping someone he could pressure without consequences. Instead, he picked a military commander with valid credentials, a clean record, witnesses, body cam footage, and a chain of command that reached far above him. That ended his career, exposed his department, and sent him to prison. What would you have done if you saw this happen in the terminal? Put it in the comments. Share the story with somebody who would want to hear it, and subscribe for more.
Now set the case down, now, and show me your ID again.
I already showed you I'm FBI. That case is classified. You need a supervisor and proper verification.
You need to do what I'm telling you.
I'm not fighting you. I'm telling you can't take federal classified
Stop
material.
This airport officer thought he was stopping an ordinary traveler he could question in public and control on the spot. But he had no idea the man in front of him was Special Agent Jordan Hayes of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, moving classified material through Dallas-Fort Worth after being pulled out of an overseas counterterrorism operation. He saw the credentials and still treated the whole thing like an act. He heard the warning about classified federal property and kept pushing anyway. That decision turned a gate corridor stop into an assault on a federal agent, a public exposure of sensitive material, and the incident that finally brought years of buried complaints back to the surface. Tell me where you are watching from, and if you follow stories about profiling, abuse of authority, and real consequences when somebody in uniform goes too far, like the video, and subscribe. Jordan Hayes had almost nothing left in the tank when Officer Tyler Grayson stopped him inside a crowded connection area at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Jordan had been pulled out of a dangerous overseas operation with almost no notice. He had spent close to 2 days awake. His hand was wrapped from an injury during extraction. He was carrying a sealed classified case that had to reach cleared federal personnel without delay. He was not looking for help, conversation, or attention. He was moving from one terminal connection to the next and trying to finish the last piece of an operation that nobody around him was cleared to understand. There was nothing dramatic about the way he moved through the terminal. He kept his pace steady. He stayed focused on the route ahead. He did not stop to argue with staff or draw attention to himself. To most people nearby, he was just another exhausted traveler trying to make a connection. Grayson saw something else. He noticed the hard case first, then the credentials, then Jordan himself. A black man, tired, injured, carrying federal identification, and moving like he expected not to be interrupted. Grayson did not take that as a sign to verify carefully. He took it as something he did not believe. That was the real reason for the stop. He stepped into Jordan's path, near the gate corridor, and forced the encounter in front of passing travelers. From the start, his tone was aggressive. He did not approach like a man trying to sort out a concern. He approached like a man who had already decided he had caught somebody pretending to be more important than he was. Jordan answered him directly. He identified himself as a federal agent. He presented credentials. He explained that he was in transit on official business, and that the sealed case contained classified material. He also made clear that the case could not be opened or surrendered without proper authorization. That should have moved the situation into verification through command. Grayson did not do that. He looked at the credentials and treated them like something fake until proven real. He kept pressing Jordan in the same hostile tone. He questioned him as if the credentials were a prop, and the case was something he had the right to take just because he demanded it. He was not trying to solve a problem. He was trying to force compliance in public. Jordan did not match that energy. He stayed controlled. He repeated the same point in plain terms. The case was classified. There was a process for verification. Grayson did not have authority to take federal material because he felt suspicious. That answer bothered Grayson more than anything else. A man like that can handle uncertainty better than refusal. Once Jordan made it clear that he was not handing over the case without proper authority, Grayson stopped acting like this was about airport security and started acting like it was about his pride. He moved closer. He raised the pressure. People nearby started noticing the stop because Grayson was making it impossible not to notice. Travelers slowed down. Some kept walking and looked back. Others stayed near the seating area and watched. The whole thing could still have been contained with one smart decision. Call a supervisor, run the verification the right way, keep the scene quiet. Grayson chose the opposite. A second officer came over and joined him. He did not calm things down. He backed Grayson and added to the pressure. That made the scene worse, because Jordan was now dealing with two local officers who had decided that force mattered more than procedure. Jordan stayed where he was. He kept his movements limited. He repeated his identity and told them again that the case involved classified federal material. He did not threaten them. He did not insult them. He did not argue beyond the boundary that mattered. He was not surrendering the case without lawful authorization. Grayson took that as a challenge. The takedown started when he grabbed Jordan's injured arm. There was no legal reason for it. Jordan had not tried to run. He had not pushed past anyone. He had not reached for the officers. He had not made any threatening move. Grayson grabbed the one arm he knew was already damaged and used it to force Jordan down onto the terminal floor. The second officer assisted instead of stopping it. Passengers stopped in full view of the scene. Some shouted that Jordan was not resisting. Others pulled out their phones and started recording. The terminal went from normal airport noise to that specific kind of public disturbance that happens when people realize an officer is going too far and nobody around him is correcting it. Jordan hit the floor hard. The wound in his wrapped hand reopened. Blood showed on the tile. The sealed case slid across the polished floor and came to a stop near a waiting area, out in the open where strangers could see it. That was the point where the stop became a security failure, on top of everything else. Grayson had claimed the stop was about control and safety, but his actions had done the opposite. He had injured a federal agent, exposed a sealed, classified case in a crowded terminal, and created the exact public scene a competent officer would have avoided from the start. Jordan still did not fight. That mattered later because every camera caught the same basic truth. He was not resisting. He was pinned down while identifying himself and warning them that they were mishandling classified federal material. He was trying to protect the case and stop the situation from getting even worse. Grayson kept issuing commands anyway, trying to make the takedown sound justified after the fact. It did not work. Too many people were close enough to see how it actually began. Too many phones were already recording. Then the body camera captured the part that changed the entire case. During the detention, Grayson said enough to make his thinking obvious. He made it clear that he did not believe Jordan was really a federal agent. Not because the credentials had failed verification, not because Jordan had contradicted himself. He did not believe him because he had already decided that the man in front of him did not fit the role he claimed to hold. That stripped away every excuse. Once that came out, nobody could seriously frame this as a misunderstanding between agencies. It was a profiling stop that turned into a public use of force incident because one officer refused to accept that a black man in front of him had real federal authority. Jordan stayed focused on the same thing the whole time. He kept identifying himself. He kept warning them about the case. He kept his attention on limiting damage. That discipline ended up mattering because the scene was seconds away from moving out of local control. The first person on site who understood the scale of the problem was Sergeant Monica Vale. When she arrived, she did not need a long explanation. She saw Jordan bleeding on the floor in restraints. She saw federal credentials that had already been presented and ignored. She saw the sealed case separated from his control in the middle of a public terminal. She saw travelers recording from multiple angles. She heard enough of the exchange to know this was not a routine airport stop that had gone messy. It was already a departmental disaster with federal consequences. Vale reacted fast because she knew delay would make it worse. She read the scene for what it was. A local officer had detained a federal agent, used force without a valid threat, and exposed classified material in public. At that point, the question was no longer whether Grayson had made a bad call. The question was how much damage had already been done before command could shut it down. Sergeant Monica Vale understood the problem as soon as she reached the scene. She saw Jordan Hayes on the floor in restraints, bleeding from the hand. She saw federal credentials already out. She saw the sealed case separated from him in a public terminal. She saw passengers recording. That was enough. She stopped listening to Tyler Grayson's tone and started looking at facts. Jordan identified himself again. He told her he was Federal Bureau of Investigation, in transit on official business, and carrying classified material. He told her the case had to stay protected until cleared federal personnel took custody. He did not over-explain. He did not argue. He stayed focused on the same point he had been making from the start. Vale ordered the cuffs removed. That changed the whole scene immediately. Grayson had been treating Jordan like a suspect he could dominate in public. Vale treated him like what he actually was, a federal agent whose authority had been ignored and whose mission had been disrupted. She then secured the area around the case and called airport command. Her questions were direct. When were the credentials shown? Why was force used? Who touched the case? Why was a man identifying himself as federal on the floor instead of being verified through command? Grayson tried to say Jordan had been suspicious and uncooperative. That explanation did not hold up. The credentials were real. Witnesses were already saying Jordan had not resisted. The case had been identified as classified before the takedown. The body cameras were running. Too many facts were already fixed. Medical personnel arrived and checked Jordan's hand. The wound had reopened during the takedown. Blood was still visible on the floor. Even then, Jordan stayed focused on the transfer. He made clear that the detention had interrupted a live federal chain and that the delay itself was now part of the damage. Airport command arrived within minutes. Once command understood that local officers had detained a Federal Bureau of Investigation agent carrying classified material, the matter stopped being a routine use of force review. It became a command-level emergency. The questions changed immediately. They wanted body camera status, witness footage, timestamps, and confirmation of when Jordan first identified himself. The answers were bad. Jordan had identified himself early. He had shown credentials. He had warned them about the case. Grayson still escalated. Force was used anyway. The case ended up exposed in public view. Civilian footage was already spreading online. Federal personnel arrived fast after that. That speed said everything. They were not responding to a minor airport dispute. They were responding to an assault on a federal agent and a public mishandling of classified material. Jordan was moved to a controlled area. His identity was verified through the channels Grayson should have used from the start. The result matched everything Jordan had said. He was Special Agent Jordan Hayes of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He was in lawful custody of the case. He was moving under active federal authority. That ended the factual dispute. From that point on, The issue was Grayson's conduct. He had ignored valid credentials, treated a federal warning like a bluff, used force without a real threat, and created a public security breach in one of the busiest airports in the country. Command pulled Grayson off the scene. The second officer was also separated. Their body cameras were flagged for review. Their reports were no longer just paperwork. They were evidence. Jordan finally got what he should have gotten at the beginning: medical treatment, command recognition, and a direct path to complete the transfer. The department by then had a different problem. Video of the takedown was already online. First short clips, then longer angles, then audio clear enough to show that Jordan had identified himself, and Grayson had ignored it. Once those videos started spreading, the department lost the ability to describe it as a routine security stop. Federal supervisors looked at it even harder. One of their agents had been injured. Classified material had been exposed in public. The stop had no solid legal basis. The body camera captured language that pointed to profiling. That moved the case beyond a bad arrest. It became a civil rights issue, an abuse of authority case, and a possible criminal matter. By the end of that first response, Grayson was no longer just an officer in a viral airport clip. He was the reason federal investigators were now looking at the entire department. Once federal investigators reviewed the body camera footage, the case changed fast. At first, the airport police department tried the usual language. They described the stop as a security response in a busy terminal. They suggested the situation developed quickly. They implied the officers were reacting to uncertainty. The footage cut through that almost immediately. Jordan Hayes identified himself early. He presented credentials. He warned Tyler Grayson that the case contained classified federal material and could not be taken without proper authorization. None of that was missing from the record. The problem was not lack of information. The problem was that Grayson chose not to accept it. That detail mattered more than anything else. A mistaken stop can sometimes be defended if an officer corrects course once facts are clear. Grayson did the opposite. The clearer Jordan was, the more aggressive Grayson became. That made the review much worse for him, because investigators were not looking at a split-second judgment anymore. They were looking at a sequence: questioning, refusal to verify properly, escalation, force, public exposure of the case, injury, all after valid federal identification had already been shown. Then investigators reached the body camera audio that destroyed the department's safest defense. Grayson said enough during the detention to show that he did not reject Jordan's claim because of a failed check or some concrete contradiction. He rejected it because he did not believe a man like Jordan should have that kind of authority in the first place. He did not say it in some polished official language. He said it the way people do when their real thinking slips out under pressure. That moved the case directly into civil rights territory. Now, the issue was not just unlawful force. It was profiling tied to authority. Jordan was not stopped because of what he did. He was stopped because Grayson decided that his presence, his credentials, and his quiet certainty did not fit the role he claimed to hold. Once that became clear, the stop stopped looking questionable and started looking deliberate. Federal supervisors made that point very clear behind the scenes, and then in a more careful form in their formal communications. They were not treating this as a misunderstanding between agencies. They were treating it as an assault on a federal agent, interference with federal duty, mishandling of classified material, and a possible deprivation of rights case. That language put real pressure on the airport police department because a local use of force problem can sometimes be absorbed internally. A federal civil rights and authority abuse case cannot. The public videos kept spreading while all of this was happening. That made things worse for the department because every new clip added context. One angle showed the takedown more clearly. Another picked up the case, sliding across the floor. Another caught bystanders saying Jordan was not resisting. One of the longer videos made the timing especially damaging. People could hear Jordan identifying himself before the force happened, not after. That eliminated another possible excuse. The department could no longer claim the officers only learned who he was once he was already on the ground. The sequence was out there. So was the blood on the floor. So was the image of a sealed case sitting away from its lawful custodian, while airport police stood around it in public. By that point, the story had moved beyond local news. Federal law enforcement circles were talking about it. Civil rights attorneys were talking about it. Former airport travelers who recognized Grayson from their own encounters started paying attention. That is when an incident stops being one event and starts pulling history behind it. Internal Affairs had to open a full review, but the department did not control the pace anymore. Federal investigators wanted every relevant piece of evidence: full-body camera footage, dispatch logs, timestamps, radio traffic, training records, prior complaints, use of force history, supervisory notes. They were not just asking what Grayson did that day. They were asking whether the department already knew he had a pattern. That question scared people more than the video. A bad officer is one problem. A bad officer kept in place after repeated warning signs is a bigger one. Departments can isolate the first if they move quickly. The second points upward. That is why old complaints started resurfacing almost immediately. Black and Latino travelers who had filed complaints against Grayson in earlier years began contacting reporters and lawyers. Some said he had stopped them in terminals without a clear reason. Some said he had treated valid identification like it was fake. Some described the same pattern Jordan had faced: aggressive tone first, suspicion without facts, then pressure to submit in public. Not every old complaint had video. Most of these cases never do. But now people were looking at them differently because Jordan's case gave those older reports a visible structure. The pattern was no longer abstract. It had a face, a name, body camera audio, civilian footage, and a federal victim the department could not dismiss. Former victims started speaking publicly. That was the point where the department's exposure widened. It was no longer only about what Grayson did to Jordan Hayes in one airport corridor. It was about how many times Grayson had done some version of it to people with less power, less documentation, and less chance of being believed. Jordan survived the stop with federal backing and a command structure behind him. Most travelers Grayson had targeted before did not have that. That comparison hit hard. It also made Jordan's role in the story bigger than his own case. He was still the victim of the stop, but now his case was also the event that forced a buried record into the open. Then the internal emails started getting attention. Those messages did not show some dramatic conspiracy. Real institutional failure is usually more ordinary than that. What they showed was enough. Supervisors had discussed complaints about Grayson over the years. Some had flagged concerns about his approach with minority travelers. Some had noted that his stops created repeated friction and unnecessary escalation. But he kept a public-facing airport assignment anyway, because he generated high stop numbers and looked productive on paper. That kind of record is poison once it becomes public. It means the department did not just fail to spot a problem. It saw enough to worry and still protected the officer because his numbers made management look active. It means complaints were not ignored by accident. They were absorbed as the cost of keeping a certain style of policing in place. That is where the case stopped being only about Tyler Grayson. Now the focus was shifting to the people who kept him there: supervisors, command staff, internal review processes, complaint screening, assignment decisions. Every layer that had looked at warning signs and decided they were manageable. Jordan, through all of this, still completed the transfer that day. That detail stayed important in every later account because it showed how much discipline he had maintained under pressure. He had been injured, detained, humiliated in public, and delayed during a sensitive federal movement. Even so, he stayed focused long enough to complete the mission before turning fully to the fallout. That gave the case another sharp contrast. The man treated like a threat acted with control the whole way through. The officer claiming to protect the airport was the one who created the actual breach. By the end of that stage, the department was facing pressure from every direction at once. Federal investigators, civil rights review, public outrage, media scrutiny, reopened complaints, internal emails, witness footage, body camera evidence. The stop in the terminal was over. The real collapse had started after it. The ending came fast once the records opened up. Tyler Grayson was removed from duty, then terminated. The second officer was suspended and later disciplined for assisting in the takedown instead of stopping it. Federal investigators kept the bigger case moving because this was not just about policy violations. They were reviewing civil rights violations, abuse of authority, and the handling of classified material during an unlawful detention. The department tried to isolate Grayson at first. That did not work. Old complaints from Black and Latino travelers were reopened. Former victims spoke publicly. Their stories sounded too similar to dismiss. Same aggressive tone, same disbelief, same habit of treating ordinary people of color like they had to prove they belonged in spaces where Grayson thought they did not fit. Then the internal emails became the real problem. Supervisors had known for years that Grayson generated repeated complaints. They had discussed his conduct. They had flagged concerns. He still stayed in a public-facing airport role because his stop numbers made him look productive. That shifted blame upward. The story was no longer about one reckless officer. It was about a department that tolerated him because the paperwork looked good. That brought outside pressure. Civil rights lawyers got involved. Federal review widened. Airport leadership had to answer for complaint handling, use of force oversight, and assignment decisions. The department was pushed into changing procedures for credential verification, supervisor response, and public contact review. Body camera audits were expanded, complaint files were re-examined, several supervisors were reassigned or forced out. Jordan Hayes finished the federal transfer the same day he was detained. After that, he gave his formal statement and let the evidence speak. He did not need to build the case with emotion. The video, the body camera, the witness accounts, and the department's own records already did that. What happened to him was serious on its own. What made it bigger was what it exposed. Grayson did this to the wrong man in the wrong place at the wrong time, and for once the system could not pretend it was an isolated mistake. Jordan had federal backing, documentation, witnesses, and chain of command support. Other people Grayson targeted before did not. That is why the case mattered beyond one airport stop. The lesson was simple. A badge does not turn bias into judgment. It just makes the damage larger when nobody stops it. What would you have done if you saw that happen in front of you? Have you ever watched somebody in authority push too far because they thought nobody would challenge them? Put it in the comments. Share the story with somebody who